Good afternoon. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Brame, and I had the honor and privilege of interviewing retired General Charlie R. Holland. Today, he is going to share his story as a SOF aviator and lessons of teamwork, relationships, and leadership, with a question and answer session to follow. Here is a video that highlights his military career.
Retired Air Force General Charles R. Charlie Holland was born in West Virginia. He entered the United States Air Force Academy and graduated in 1968 with a Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical Engineering. General Holland received a master's degree in business management from Troy State University in 1976 and then a master's in astronautical engineering from the Air Force Institute of Technology in 1978. He completed several professional military education schools, to include the Industrial College of the Armed Forces in 1986. In addition, he completed the program for senior officers in national security in 1990 and the National and International Security Management Program in 1998, both at Harvard University. In 2003, General Holland retired as the commander, United States Special Operations Command. During that assignment, he was responsible for all special operation forces of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, both active and reserve. Prior to the culmination of his active duty military career, General Holland commanded a squadron in the Philippines, 2 Air Force wings, served as a Deputy Commanding General of the Joint Special Operations Command, and was Commander, Special Operations Command Pacific. Prior to commanding U.S. SOCOM, he commanded the Air Force Special Operations Command and was the Vice Commander of U.S. Air Forces in Europe. General Holland was a command pilot with over 5,000 flying hours, which included over 100 combat missions in multiple C-130 and SOF aircraft, to include a combat tour in the AC-130 gunship at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base, Thailand, during the war in Southeast Asia. After retiring from the Air Force, General Holland now serves as the director or advisor of multiple corporate boards and acts as an independent consultant for the Air Force, as well as several companies, to include Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. For the past 12 years, he has provided an executive-level counsel for Air Force wargame design in a joint, combined, interagency, and multi-level security construct. He is also volunteered in the Special Operations Warrior Foundation Board. General Holland and his wife of 44 years, Nancy, now live in Tampa, Florida. They have 2 grown sons, Charles and Justin.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the gathering stage General Charlie Holland.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, please be seated. It's great to be here with you. The last time I was on this stage was after I came out of Afghanistan in 2002, and I was in Desert BDUs. I had just left out of Bagram to head back this way, and so I'm having kind of flashbacks. I really appreciate Air University and the Air Command Staff College for doing this. It's really honored and humbled to be part of these great Americans that have really done a lot. And of course, they've made my job easy, because when you think about what Charlie Mike and what Dredge and Don just presented, you know, I had a different perspective because where I was in the command at the time, but at least from the operational piece, you can understand why in our business we give a wide range of intent, because we have people that are dedicated, that you can trust, and they know how to get the mission done. So, but before I continue on, I'd like to have all the international students stand up. I told her there were 68 of you here, so I don't want to count here, but just keep standing. Now, as they're standing, I want all of you to look around, because each one of them represent opportunities. And I'm going to tell you 2 or 3 things that have happened during my time because of sessions like this. So again, we fight joint, combined, interagency. And I like more friends than enemies. And these are our friends. And so let's make sure. But again, I look forward to meeting each and every one of you, and appreciate what you do for your country and what you do in the line of freedom. So thank you. Now, a couple quick stories. With the Army General Staff College, I was out speaking in Leavenworth, and when I was out there, this was after I had a mission that we got, was a Georgia Train and Equip program. I don't know if all of you remember that, but President Shevardnadze wanted me to come over and to meet with him. So we had the Minister of Defense from Georgia, and across from him was Lieutenant Colonel Wademeyer, who was the 2nd Battalion of the 10th Special Forces Group commander. And then I was sitting right across from President Shevardnadze. Of course, there was cameras in the rooms, and as the discussion went on, what I didn't realize that of course, the Minister of Defense, who now are their chairman, obviously he was a general officer, and our guy was a lieutenant colonel, but they were at Leavenworth together. And the one thing that is really evident within the special operations community, when you see someone from one of the countries, you never know when you're going to be able to see them. But the fact that they knew each other, so as we came in, they grabbed each other, they hugged each other, and I told President Shevardnadze, we don't have to worry about a thing. These two people know each other, and we'll get the job done. And we trained the first 10 battalions of the Georgia Train Equip. Of course, right after that, then we moved off into Afghanistan and then over to Iraq. I'll tell you another story about, when you're a JTF commander, and at the SOC Pact, it was a standing Joint Task Force 510, which I commanded. So anytime the SINC saw something he wanted us to go out and get started on, I would get the call. And this one particular time, Admiral Mackey had been the SINC before, and then Admiral Preer took over. And there's some things heating up down north of Australia. And it looked like we had to do a humanitarian part of this. And he says, okay, Charlie, you're the task force commander. Go down and see what you need to do. I got with the ambassador. And when I was with the ambassador, there was a guy named Archie Clemens. And I don't know if any of you knew Archie Clemens, but he was the commander of the 7th Fleet. So he had the Blue Ridge. And he was a 3-star. I was a 1-star. And I get a call from him, and he says, Charlie, I now work for you. And so the point here, it's not about rank sometimes. It's about whoever's in the best position to do whatever the senior leadership wants you to do. And as we got together, I got in touch with my counterpart from that particular country. We had a very close relationship, and I said, look, here's 3 things that I need. And he says, I think I can help you out. And I needed a place I could bring the ship in, because I was going to use the ship as where I was going to command from the DeSoto perspective. I needed a place I could take the helicopters in, so you needed an HLZ, and I needed a place to see 130s. In the theater, we also had Joint Combined Exchange training going on. I had people over in Malaysia, Thailand, and a couple other countries in that part, and probably some people over in the Philippines. And I gave them a warning order. I said, don't do anything now, but if you get the order, then come forward. And what I didn't want to do was if you had them to come over quick, then all of a sudden the signature of U.S. forces being somewhere to do something. And we didn't want to do that. And so that night, this individual took off in his C-130s with 1,246 of his people. And he went forward. And I get a call from him. I'm back at the embassy, so we're having updates to the SINC in the morning and in the evening. And the same thing, I'm meeting there with the ambassador. And I keep getting calls from the SINC, and he's saying, do you need anything? I said, no, I don't need anything. He said, what do you mean you don't need anything? I said, so here's how we're postured right now to do this. And so then I get a call from my counterpart, and his words to me, he says, okay, I've got all 3 places secured, but if you give me about another week, I think I can wrap this up for you. And so there's 3 of us at the embassy. And so at least we had the 3 of us, so we divided up so we had somebody could answer the phone anytime during that 24-hour period. And so I said, okay, I'll stay here at the embassy. We kept getting updates from him, and lo and behold, he solved it. And what he did is he brought some of these people back that were the ones that were protesting, which was going to cause us to do the humanitarian operation. And as a result, what he did is he took some of these people and got them an opportunity to meet with the Minister of Social Welfare, and they solved the problem. Now, we did not do that from a U.S. perspective, But the fact that the nation, and because of relationships, and one thing I want you to take away is relationships are very important. But those relationships have to be kind of like what Charlie Mike talked about. There's got to be trust, you got to have credibility, and you really got to understand what the mission is. And when they call upon you, they know you're going to be there at the time and place where you said you were going to be. And so I think those are two very good examples of why we feel very strong about what we're doing. Some of you have probably seen that I'm also play the role of the U.S. STROCCOM commander. I'm as far as global engagement, and right now I'm out in the Pacific. I understand you went through some wargaming this past year, and that's great too. But when you look at wargaming these days, it's not air-sea battle, it's not air-land battle, but it's air, land, sea, space, cyber, and human, all working together. And now what that does, it complicates the communications a little bit more than before, because you need to have assured comms. And some people say, well, no, what I'll do is I'll just delegate it in the last order, and the last order as it goes forward, if we break comm, then they know what they're going to do. And I says, yes. But as a commander, there's going to be times that you're going to need to call the force back. And I'll tell you that story. We're in Haiti, if you remember Haiti, and remember right at the last minute it was called off. And during this time, I was in control of all the pre-assault fires, as well as all the air from 2,000 feet and below, which is where SOF was operating. And during this time, Hugh Shelton, who later became the chief, he was on the Mount Whitney with Jay Johnson as his deputy. He was Task Force 180. I was Deputy Task Force 188. Pete Schoonmaker was Task Force 188 commander. And he was on the USS America, and I was up on that 135 overhead. Well, I get a call from Shelton. If you remember, right at the last minute, we were able to go in there peacefully. And so as the call came in, the guys on the 135, they said, sir, why don't you just tell them that everything was garbled, we're continuing this frag, just let us get the airfield seizure done, and let us do the pre-assault fires, and then we can say, hey, we got comms back again. Obviously, I didn't do that. And so I told General Shelton, yes, we have comms, and we had them RTB, return to base at Hurlburt. And then I went out on the Mount Whitney to see General Shelton, and he looked at me and he pointed at me in the chest. I was glad that you had comms with those gunships, because just think, President Clinton was the president at the time, and if that had gone the other way and then we'd actually fired shots after it had already been resolved, that wouldn't have been good for him, and I guarantee you I wouldn't be standing on this stage with you, right now. And you say, well, did he ever remember that after that? So, well, remember, he became our SYNC, and then after he became that, he became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So I'm up there with him as the chairman, and again, he comes over and pokes me. And he says, I was glad you had control of those gunships, because obviously I definitely wouldn't have been there. He wouldn't have been where he was, because President Clinton looked at him as a big hero when he went after Sadris. So these things about, relationships and trust, and then with all this, in the type of domains that we're going to be fighting in, having assured comms, resiliency, having secure, anti-jam, redundant systems. This is what's ringing loud and clear. In the war game, we have Russell Mack playing the CJTF commander, and he was the Major General. He's now the Vice Commander of PACF, and he is came from ACC. And when somebody asked him, what's your biggest challenge? And he says, communications. You talk to John Hyten, communications. Of course, with him, it's in C3, nuclear communications. And so when you look at, what we need to be thinking about and how we're going to do it, it takes everybody. And when it says take everybody, your worth that you provide to our services has nothing to do with your proximity to the target. What it has to do with is whatever job you're assigned to, number one, it's important. It wouldn't be around if it wasn't important, because we'd have auditors out there and they'd be getting rid of them, those positions. But you got to have confidence in what you can do and the role that you play, regardless of what that is. I mean, I can tell you the most important mission on some of the missions that I flew might be an airman. And maybe this airman, if I have an engine problem, I mean, I know how to shut down the engines, I know how to start them. I can land without one or two. On a 130, we have 4, so I can land without 2. But I don't know how to fix them. So if I had an engine problem, who's the most important person? At that point in time, I guarantee you, that maintenance guy and an airman, that might be the one that fix. And, during my time as a South Commander, I would work as an airman once every quarter. And my LG at the time, he would always put me on the dirtiest mission or where he thought there were problems, because he knew if I saw a problem that I would come back and get resources and fix it. And so I would carry the tools out with my airmen. But what I got to see, and I got to walk in their shoes on how they did the missions and what were the problems. And the same thing with, flying the different aircraft. I wanted to go out there when it was really hot. I wanted to go in Djibouti when it was like 130 degrees in the cockpit. I wanted to see what our people were doing in those particular environments. And so it's really important. And my bottom line to all of that part is that leadership is a contact sport. When I was at JSOC, Bill Garrison, he was back on a trip, and he came back, and next thing you know, somebody put a computer in his office. And he says, "Get that damn thing out of here." He says, "That's a problem today." Now, I'm not saying that you should never use a computer, but I'm saying when that becomes your primary method to either task or to get in touch with people, then you're losing the very most important part, because the most important part of what we do is the human. I mean, that's the one when I had 3 things. RPM. Being a pilot, you understand RPM is pretty important. When it's a good RPM, you're going to be able to take off and fly. If it's not, then you got problems. But readiness, people, and then modernization. And I used people as the center post of those 3 objectives that what we needed to accomplish. And so the word is that don't care about, it's more than just about rank, because when you look at the examples that I've just talked about, sometimes that airman's going to be the one that's going to save your mission for you. It's not about who gets the credit, and it's amazing what happens when you don't care who gets the credit. And when you have people like that in your organization, things really get done. Because the last time you won is somebody said, "Well, look, I did this, I want credit for it." Well, no, it has nothing to do with taking credit. And making sure you have a good listening ear. I always joked with my guys, I'd always work out with them in the morning, whether it be the SEALs down at, whether it be at Rota, Guam, or the SF guys, Special Tactics guys, and Cal, they got it right. What they would do is we would go out and run. So we do the morning run, about 3 or 4 miles, but they'd always run at a level that made me do more listening than talking. And so my aide would come up, and then we'd hear them, and they would say, "Hey, here's what our concerns are." And then as a result of that, we went back and did a hot watch, said, "Okay, what are the things we need to work on?" But they knew that if I was doing more listening than talking, then they had more opportunities. And after I retired, they said, "Sir, we had more time with you on those runs than what probably any of the other people had when they were out, with you at the meetings." And so, I mean, that's what it's all about. So again, leadership is a contact sport. The war game that we're in right now, I can't really go into a lot of detail at this forum, but the aspect of bringing everyone together, to me, at this particular point in time, is probably the healthiest it's ever been. I talked to each of the commanders out in the Pacific, whether it be, not so swift at the fleet. We had, the USUS Army PAC, MAR PAC, obviously SOC PAC. Shags O'Shaughnessy was the PAC-F commander. And so when I would talk to them, we were looking at, okay, where are the friction points? And the one thing that comes away is one friction point that is not there at the leadership level is it's not about who's in charge or who gets the credit. It's about we've got to work together as a team. And when you talk to people like Dave Gardner, who is the Marfork PAC commander, he says, my biggest problem in the Pacific is logistics. When you look at the tyranny of distance in that part of the world, how are you going to operate? Not So Swift says, okay, what about ports? We need to have a different way to address that. So we're coming up with adaptive ports. Maybe you don't need a large port like what we have up in Japan, but maybe you have a place where you can just offload, supplies or or troops to a particular area. And so everyone has a different view. Of course, our SOC PAC guys, they look at the human domain, because as you look at the number of international people here, right now SOCOM is in 90 countries around the world. We have 9,000 people that are deployed, and that says that maybe it's just a JSET, a Joint Combined Exchange Training, which might be an ODA of 12 people or so, but that's where we're spread. And those relationships that are being developed are going to be very key to where our future is. So as we all continue to take on whatever the challenges are that are down the road. Some of the things I'd like to touch base on, because you just heard from Cal, Don, and Darge. And when you look at each of those operations, I was there right in the aftermath. When I was, when everybody wanted to know, okay, where were you on 9/11? I had, Lieutenant General Bill Tangney was my deputy, and he was a former USASOC commander. I went downstairs for a meeting. I came up, and he met me in the hallway, and he says, hey, there's just something went into the trade tower. And I said, well, what's the weather? And I was really thinking, small airplane, that's not beyond anyone's imagination. And he says, no, the weather's great. We walked into my office, and there it was. We saw the second one go in, and my word to him is, our world has just changed. And then the phone started ringing. And some of the first missions we did, we put 53s on the Intrepid, because we thought we needed to help out the people there in New York, but we found out that the fire and rescue in New York, they had definitely a great capability, and we did not have as many survivors as what, not that we ever anticipated, but that was horrific on what happened. But what we are able to do is that the infrared cameras, we were able to help the firefighters see where the hot spots were so they could develop their course of action on how to fight the fire. We came off of that, General Tommy Franks, obviously there at CENTCOM, and I will tell you there's something that's a little bit different between this and Desert Storm. When Carl Steiner was the SYNC, Carl went over to see Schwarzkopf, and Schwarzkopf said, Carl, we don't need you guys, this is a big man's war. Well, when the SCUG started coming in, then that changed and we got involved. Now I just want to compare that to the relationship that I have with Tommy Franks. From Tommy's standpoint, he says, Charlie, I want every special operator you got. So we go from we don't really need you to we need all of them. And he says, if anybody, I said, we support other the SYNCs. We were called SYNCs during that time. And he says, I don't care. He says, when we go up to see Secretary Rumsfeld, I will get up on the table and I'm saying, look, all these SYNCs out here, I'm the only one that's got the war. So I get what I want. And so 90% of all of SOF deployed, went to Tommy Franks and CENTCOM. And so as that went on. Now let's get to, what happened on 19 October. 19 October is when we did the airfield seizure. We went into Omar's compound. What Tommy wanted us to do, he says, Charlie, we need to do something different because I want these people to understand that American troops are going to be on the ground. This is not like Kosovo. I mean, what they've done is they've upset the United States and we're going to take it to them. And I need you to come up with something that really is going to get them startled. And we didn't want to go into the mouth of the enemy, but we wanted to take down some significant places. And so in 19 October, we came off the Kitty Hawk with the 160th. And we also had people coming out of Karshikanabad, Jacobabad, which where the 53s were. We had 47s that were up at K2 and right there at Karshikanabad. So when that force came together and we went in, they went in and took down Omar's compound, and they actually plastered pictures of what happened at the New York Trade Center. And they wanted to do that from a psychological perspective so that when Omar looked at his summer residence, that he realized how these guys ever get in there this easy. And we were very successful in doing that. The only thing that we did is we sheared a 47 gear off coming across the barrier outside. There was a wall around the city, and but the good thing about a helicopter, yeah, you don't really need the gear. You can take off and land, and so that all worked out well. And they did the assault, and then at the same time we did the airfield seizure. At that point in time, I got a call from OSD, and Secretary Rumsfeld. They wanted to do some publicity. Now, I was adamant that, okay, some publicity is good, and there's some publicity that's bad. At this particular time, the adversary didn't realize that we had gunships, so there was something they thought were mortars. And there were some missions that were coming down that were very sensitive, and I had started getting gray hair over it because of the risk. And whenever there's risk as a commander, you really got to do a lot of soul searching and how much you're willing to accept, what you can do to mitigate. So I had the people continue going back and work the plan, and I'll say, okay, what can we do to get the risk down? But the gunship was very important, and when you look at the elevation, 10,200 feet on the top where Don was, and then you think about the SA-7s, which we got to these people early on when they were fighting against the Soviet Union, or the Russia at the time, so that was a big concern. And so I told him, I said, okay. I says, the thing that we'll show is the airfield seizure, because I think that really got to the essence, that American troops were going to go in, and we actually had that filmed, and that came up on CNN. And then the next piece that we did is we showed, as we went into Omar's compound, where we put these pictures of the trade tower when it went down, and with these people standing up with the American flag. And the word we got back from Omar, he couldn't believe, how effectively and how easy it was for our troops to do it. At the same time, unfortunately, we did lose 2 people at a dust out, down in Pakistan. We had a rescue site set up, so if things did happen wrong, we had a place to take them out of country to provide, additional medical care, or to go in and get them with a rescue force. So obviously, all that went very well. So I actually got into Afghanistan about 45 days after 9/11. And when I went in there, I had a protective security detail with me. And the person that was in charge of the assault was the team leader. And I had him on my detail, and Mark Stevens. And so I told him, I says, okay, Mark, when we land on the 47, just don't shear the gear this time. So we went in, we came in, and he took me on how his whole alignment was, this door, through here, what he found, and then all the different information that they were able to extract out of there as far as information to help us. And so overall, a very good mission. Now, the next time I went into Afghanistan, and they'll tie this into some of the stories, the guy that was on my protective security detail, this time it was a SEAL team, so I would kind of make sure that I had maybe an Army protective. Next time it would be a Navy piece. One time it might be some of our SOC guys, especially when I went out to the Pacific. And on this particular one of the guys was Neil Roberts Ridge. And my wife was with me on this trip. Obviously, I didn't take her in Afghanistan, but she was with me on the rest of the trip, so you really get to know that protective security detail pretty well. And of course, Mark Stevens, I had known him before, and he was aware of all this. But Neil Roberts, and then another guy, that whole team, since they were very much involved with what was going to happen later, these people were all pumped up. Now, little did we know what was going to happen up on top of the mountain. Now, we get further into this. Some people say, well, why were you surprised? You got all this sophistication. We had space, but space has a revisit rate, but we kept imaging the top and we didn't see any movement. We brought in the Predator, but as it made some time there, it really didn't have a lot of time to spin there, but when it came over and it did a few orbits, and they didn't see anything. We even had a gunship come over, and they didn't see anything. And the thing about human terrain mapping, sometimes it takes time. And in fact, that's some of the things that we do with the predators and reapers within, whether they be the Great Eagles out of Army Special Ops Command or whether they be out of Hurlburt and Cannon. But it's all about taking your time and seeing what's the pattern of life. And then by that, then you can kind of assess. But in this particular case, there wasn't that time, but then time is your enemy, and especially if we don't have the time to do it right. So no, we did not know that these guys were embedded as well. They were very well camouflaged, as Don said. So yes, it was a wake-up call. There was a lot of confusion on where we were going to land. And in fact, where they landed was not where the plan was put together. So there were some changes. And then the communications, there were some breakdowns in that. Also the command structure. This was to support the 10th Mountain. The 10th Mountain, at this particular time, they said, well, Soph, we just need you to go and do some recon for us. And here's where you can go. You can choose where you want to go. Well, high terrain, exactly like Don said, it's immediately, oh, hey, there's the top of the mountain. That's where we ought to do our recon. But then the enemy gets a vote. And even though we thought there was nobody there and we thought it was a good place, well, it turned out it wasn't. So there was a lot of confusion in that part of the operation. But anyway, we got involved with that. The other guy that was on Don's airplane was a PJ, Jason Cunningham. Jason bled out. We couldn't get to him. It was about 9 hours. But all during that time, he was given instructions to the Army medic on what they need to do, and whether it might be buddy care from the Rangers or the other medic, and it was given instructions until he actually passed. And before that, he got the Air Force Cross, and Jim Roach came up to Hurlburt to present that to his wife at Hurlburt. And so even through all of this, and when you look at what was happening and what was not happening, I mean, there was definitely a lot of challenges for the force there, and there was a lot of great respect. Now, there was another guy, John Chapman. John Chapman was a combat controller. And Cal, I know you know John well. And he was killed. And I went to see Val, who was his wife, up at JSOC. They had done a 100-mile run, and all the proceeds were given to her and to her 2 small girls that she had by her side. And what has just happened recently is that President Trump has called Val and said that we're going to upgrade the medal that he got, the Air Force Cross, to a Medal of Honor. Because what we found out that he was still there fighting when everybody left. They thought there was no survivors. Well, John was still alive, because what we were able to do is we found some good space imagery, and we saw that there were gunshots. And we know where that he departed to start his insertion to go up to where he could help Neil, because they were very close. And the same thing when I went to Neil's memorial up in Virginia, I found out he was one of 12 brothers, and to see that family and to see how they felt about Neil. When it came out in the news, my wife says, "Is that Neil?" And I says, "Yes, that's Neil Roberts," because she, when you have a small protective security detail, you get to know them pretty well, because their whole job is to make sure you're protected while you're on these particular missions. So that part of it. Another thing one of the things we did, I went up when we went into Iraq. Talil was a big suspected chem bio area. If you remember, we hit it with T-LAMs. The Tomahawks went in, but we couldn't. We didn't know what the BDA was. So we get a call from Tommy Franks. He says, "Charlie, I want your guys to do the BDA assessment of what we just hit." Okay, so you're there. You got chem gear on, but do you think you have all the protection you need? Well, they had a small UAV. They flew over. They put some M9 tape on the front of it. It didn't change colors. It came back and says, "Well, we've done everything we can to mitigate. Now let's go." So they're like the human canaries. And so they went into there, and we didn't find anything. I actually went to that location, and I followed very closely the team sergeant that was in front of me, because there was unexploded ordnance, all around this area. But again, they told me, These were 10 Special Forces guys that were in the mountains up in that area. From there, we went up to see the Kurds. And I always have to say this, and every time that I give a presentation, the Kurds were very excited to have us back. Because at this point in time, they had been living in fear ever since the Taliban had taken over. Their women were raped. There was indiscriminate killing of women and children. And for the first time, they finally got what they called their precious land back to them. There was a little picnic area. So when I got out of the helicopter, and my protective security detail, they were kind of concerned because about 300 of the elders were around me. And so I had an interpreter, and we were talking to them. I saw the women in their traditional garb over to the side. I saw their kids out here playing soccer. And then the elders wanted me to go with them to their promised land. And so we walked up. It was probably around the 5,000-foot area. So we landed. It was probably about 2,000. We walked up this hill. And he says, because of you, we have our land back. And what was happening before was that that was the high ground, and the high ground was controlled by the bad guys. And what we ended up doing is wherever there was a foxhole, we donated either a 105 to it, or we had A-10s. And so they kind of cleared that out, and it gave them the cover. Charlie Cleveland was the commander of the 10th Special Forces Group. So Charlie escorted me on all this part of it. And I asked Charlie, I said, well, how do you feel about working with these guys? He says, I would trust them with my life. And he says, when we got there, and we had to fight uphill, and all they had on was they had an AK-47, a knife or a pistol in their belt, the tennis shoes on, and they were heading up the hill. And there were some of them that were killed. Our guys, of course, flak vest. I mean, none of our people were killed in that particular operation. But for them, it was a real victory. And it was a victory because, we came over, to help them to get their land back. So I came away with a very strong feeling about, what they do in that part of the world. So those are just some of the excerpts from what we were involved with. After this, or I guess maybe I should go back to when I became the SINC, and the president gets us all together at a cabinet meeting. And General Shelton says, Charlie, you got 5 minutes. And you're going to have to tell the president all you can tell him in 5 minutes about SOF. I said, look, there's no way I can cover that in 5 minutes. I says, I'm going to invite him to come down to Fort Bragg. And he says, well, you got 5 minutes. So whatever you do in 5 minutes, it's up to you. And so during my time with President Bush, I said, okay, Mr. President, here's kind of how the makeup of SOF. But for you to really understand, I want you to come down and I want you to look at the eyes of the people that you're going to call on to do a national type mission. And you need to have the faith and confidence, the same faith and confidence that I as a commander have on their willingness to do the mission, and they will be successful. And I also told him, when we did some of these other operations, that we'd done in the past, I went through some of those. And some went well, and some didn't. But at the same time, we lived up to what our reputation was. And then President Bush says, okay, I'm coming. Well, as soon as he said that, then Secretary of Defense came over, and he said, okay, before he comes, you're going to have me come down. I said, okay, we can do that. And then the Vice President Cheney came over, and he said, okay, Charlie, you take care of the SecDef, and you take care of the president. After you take care of them, then have me come down, and then we'll go through it. And so when we had Secretary Rumsfeld come down, we had a hostage situation. We used live ammo, and the secretary was so impressed with that, he went back and told his wife, as when he comes back reincarnated, he wants to come back as an SF guy. And he was really impressed with what he saw. And so he went back and told the president that. And so now I'm at the next meeting we had with the president, and he says, hey, whatever you did, General Holland, to Rumsfeld, you do to me. And I said, well, I'm going to need some help with your Secret Service guys. He said, not a problem. And I says, well, because we use live ammo. He said, okay, got it. And then what we ended up doing is just rather than just have one thick glass between us and the bullets, because you're always concerned about the frags, then we put two. Secret Service were happy, and so he got to see it. And then we took him to the element that the organization that took down Omar's compound. And what they provided to him was one white brick from Omar's compound back to the president in his White House. And he really, when he grabbed a hold of that, he says, now that means something. So every time I would go in and see him, I said, where's that brick? He'd say, look, I keep that one because I want to keep that because that's a great reminder of what your people did. So we had a good relationship with him. Every time I would get with him, he'd ask me, he said, General Holland, what is Rumsfeld not giving you? And I told him, I'm getting great support from the Secretary. In fact, sometimes I got too many notes and letters from him, but and that's another part of the story. When I go back to, let's just look at what happened during Desert One. You remember we went into isolation. We lost 7 guys on that operation. The one guy that was a good friend of mine was Hal Lewis. We were both 130s together. To be a aircraft commander in SOF, you had to have at least 1,500 hours. And so the assignments came down. I went to gunships, and Hal went to combat talons. And Hal was the aircraft commander that lost his life at Desert One. And so you look at all that planning. So we're 2 or 3 months, isolation, out in the desert, trying to bring a force together. Well, the time that I got in to Afghanistan in December of '01, and this is after we did the first operation on 19 August, we did 27 operations at the size and complexity of Desert One, and nobody even knew that we had accomplished them. And that's coming off the Kitty Hawk, where we had a force on there, people coming out of Karshikanabad, Uzbekistan, same thing out of Jacobabad, Pakistan. So, how we performed that and did it, it shows you, how this particular force has matured, over these years. And so I think that's a real testimony to the people that we now have in the force. After we got into Afghanistan, this is at this time, Secretary Rumsfeld wanted us to train the Afghan National Police. And so we took that on. And I said, well, I need to find somebody to do the Georgia Train and Equip program. So we transferred that over to the Marines. And I told General Pace at the time, I said, look, we're not going to leave you hanging. We'll do a battle handover, a training handover, whatever you want to call it. And but we're not going to leave until you really feel comfortable with your people, with their ability to do the training. Because now we're going over to train the Afghan National Police. We did the first 10 of those. And then the word came down is that, hey, there's another country we're going to go into. And I brought the same thing up to Secretary Rumsfeld. Now, all this training going on, the people I have involved, if you want us to do this, I need somebody else to do that. And he said, not worry, we'll find somebody else to do that. Yeah, your number one job is to get ready to go over into Iraq. And of course, the Iraq with the threat of the WMD, to me, people say, well, they didn't find any. When I landed at Baghdad, they told me, hey, I think we found it. So I went out in the desert, and it turned out it wasn't. We got the DTRA guys, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, all over it, but we didn't find anything. Now, was it there, not there? Did it hide somewhere else? I don't know, but from the command perspective, there is no way that I'm not going to assume that it's there. Because if I have people that are in harm's way dealing with that and I have that big problem, then that's something I'm going to have to live with the rest of my life. So we trained hard, for that piece of it. But as I said, we didn't find it. And then, of course, now, things are continuing going. So after we did all the march into Baghdad, we did the Go Plats down in, there was a big concern that Saddam Hussein would once again do an environmental disaster. And so we put a 12 Pavlos and a bunch of SEALs, and we seized all the Go Plats. But prior to that mission, which happened about the March time frame of 2003, we had our PSYOP bird, Commando Solo, out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, send PSYOP messages, and they were the first ever to deploy in Iraq, and they went in on December the 10th to actually start sensitizing the people. And our whole message was We do not want you to cause a disaster. That doesn't have anything to do for your country. Look at all the harm you do. We want to come in, and if we do come in, we don't want any resistance. And it was amazing. Our SEALs didn't know at the time because we didn't know if the GO-plats, the gas and oil platforms, had IEDs on them or not. So we had a lot of our people that actually searched for that. We found out we didn't really find any. And when we got up there, the guys put their weapons down because we had told them, we're not here to kill you. We're just here to make sure that we seize the platform and we go from there. So are we getting close?
So, yes, sir. Are you about ready for some questions?
Okay, but you can see the tie between, the three presenters before and the role that all of us played. And I can't overemphasize how it's all about relationships and it's all about trust. And when you have the trust and the relationship, then you can give a lot wider area of intent. And for all my years in command, and I've had 8 different commands, 2 of them which when I was the deputy, but in all those, wide area of intent, and they never let me down once. And Cal Markham can stand up, and I know he can say that too. It was the same thing, he worked for him. So I have to admit, I stood on the shoulder of a lot of great people, and they're the ones that gave me the opportunities that I had as I went down the road. So with that, if you have a question or they have a question.
Okay. Does anyone in the audience have a question?
So how much more time we have?
We've got about 7 minutes.
Okay, so if you have a question, or I'll keep going.
Oh, we've got one right here.
Oh, there we go.
I got to ask you a lot of questions for the book, sir.
Okay.
Afternoon, General. Major Mackey, Flight 15.
No.
I have a question about AFSOC's relationship with its leaders. It seems to be very fluid and flexible. Could you provide maybe some insight or advice to those of us who aren't in AFSOC, and how we can message properly to our leadership that they can loosen the reins a bit?
Okay, you're talking about the leadership within senior within SOF, and then how that would apply if you're on the conventional side?
Yes, sir. I think that would touch on it. A big theme we've had this year is, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but be bold, take risks, step outside traditional lines of what's normal, I guess. And some of the gentlemen that spoke earlier today sort of touched on that, thinking about the U-28
okay.
and his whole Colonel DiArgenio's experience.
Okay, well, for one, we couldn't do the job that's required if we didn't make sure that our people understood that they could go out there and do that, and that I would always have their back, and the same thing with the commanders after that. But, I was talking to General Goldfein. I was just with him in April because they get all the retired 4-stars together. And he's of that mindset. And so, it didn't happen overnight with us, but I think where we are today that there are some great opportunities. I was with General Hyten 2 weeks ago, and he asked me about, hey, how can we be more relevant with space, with SOCOM? He says, I would like to do a warfighting talks between STRATCOM and SOCOM. Well, I've already talked to General Thomas. We're going to do that. We got the chief of staffs of both organizations talking. And from his standpoint, he says, I need to be able to find and fix from space. I need to make sure that there are ways that my space assets are providing that essential comms to me so that I can really say I've got assured comms. And I just need to understand that space is protecting those critical assets. So I think in the broad brush, there's a lot that's happening that's very positive. Now, okay, how long does that take to permeate all the organizations? And but I know that when I go out and talk to COCOMs, every COCOM wants more SOF. And so I realized during my time with Secretary Rumsfeld, we were able to double the amount of people. We tripled the budget. The only problem is the tasks now have quadrupled. And but people see that how when you take empowered people and with people you trust, that you train to the nth degree, then this is what makes success. And even as we picked up General Goldfein, or at that time Lieutenant Colonel Goldfein, when he got shot down in the F-16. You know, that came down to us because we had guys out of Brindisi. We put together a soft team, 2 53s, a 60 at that time was rescue, and we spent 30 people to go after him. It's a similar mission that we accomplished. We went after Zelko before that, F-117. And so when you got the President of the United States looking at the Secretary Cohen looking at that time, it was Hugh Shelton. And Hugh Shelton said, I know exactly the people that can go get him. And you would never think that. Okay, stealth fighter, what's 2 53s and a 60? And of course we had an A-10 overhead as we went in and rescued Zelko. But it was important to President Clinton that we did that because of what happened in Mogadishu on 3 and 4 October 93. And we had those 17 people killed, and if you remember, we had 2 Medal of Honor winners out of that, Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart. And they were, some of them were dismembered. And he did not want that to happen with an American symbol of a stealth fighter pilot, so that was very important to him as a top national objective to get him out of there. But it's going to be something that, you know, right now we're bringing conventional people in to be interns in SOCOM. And what we're trying to show them is how we do acquisition. I mean, when you look at less than 9 months to give a capability that Dredge talked about, you know, what is our Air Force doing? And so right now there's a lot of efforts on how can we accelerate acceleration. I mean, the last thing you want to do is there's a lot of great ideas out there, but if they don't get nurtured and get the resources, then you can't make it happen. I was listening to Ellen Lord, who is she has the piece, you know, we broke out Frank Kendall at ATL. We now have acquisition and sustainment under Ellen, and Mike Griffin, former NASA, he's got research and engineering. And so with that, they are also talking about how do we speed up, and we need to make sure that people understand in all the services that we need to be more responsive to those types of capabilities. But I think it's going to just, it's like anything, it probably takes time, but you can use, you know, our examples of what we see, and if you want me to talk to somebody, I'll talk to them, because, you know, every time that I have an opportunity in forums like this, you know, we talk about, you know, the empowered individual, and you look at what we're getting involved today. These kids that are coming out today, they really understand cyber a heck of a lot more than I understand it. We've got people in the space community these young kids that are coming out, and they're really grasping it, the way they're multitasking, and so we've got a generation that's coming up through that we need to make sure that they feel empowered. So it happens with all the domains, and the more that I talk to the senior leaders, like out in the Pacific, I mean, I see it out there. I mean, I think General O'Shaughnessy, I would say that he definitely empowers people. Now, the only thing is, it's that level, so, but what about the in-between? So I would just say keep the faith, keep working it, and keep doing, you know, what you need to do, and don't be bashful about taking it forward. I would never turn down a good idea from anybody, and even if it came from my airmen. And I will tell you, some of our airmen have the best ideas because they know how to save money because they work with those problems every day, and it frustrates them. And so, okay, you can do something about it. But we got to have people that are very open to that, and if you're not open, yeah, then I can see where maybe there's some changes that need to take place. But no, it's a great thing, but keep the faith.
Sir, we've got a question over at the front mic on that
Oh,
side.
okay.
Sir, Major Jeff Fry, Flight 2. From your past experience in the CENTCOM AOR, I'm wondering, it appears the fight with ISIL is dwindling down in Iraq and Syria. What do you think is the best way to transition or exit out of that conflict successfully?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I mean, what we're trying to do is train, advise, and assist more. When we talked to the president there of Iraq, he said that, you know, like he had 200,000 people that there's trained, but the soft force was only like 30,000, but they're doing 70% of the missions. And he says, if I can get you to stay and we can train another 35,000, if we have